Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Jen Kentner. I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator for the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission. Today, we're going to be covering the K-12 School Safety Grant Program for 2021 applicants. So before we go ahead and get started with the webinar, I'd like to cover some housekeeping and also introduce our panelists. So just so everyone is aware, this webinar will be recorded and it's going to be made available for future reference. The recording is going to be posted on OFCC's website within 1 business week. I'd also like to state that this webinar is for prior 2021 applicants or for those who were listed in the 2021 applicant eligibility list also found on our website. There is a webinar for new 2022 applicants, and that's on our website right now. If that is you, you are able to sign up, and that webinar will also be recorded and made available after the fact. So please also keep your microphones muted during this session. The chat will be monitored, and if you have any comments or questions, please utilize the chat function. We will have an opportunity for questions at the end of this webinar. And thank you for joining us. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and introduce some of our panelists. From OFCC, we have Jeff Westhoven, Chief of Program Services, Jean Stevenson, Grants and Procurement Administrator, and Chris Bruner, Grants Financial Analyst. From Ohio's Office of Budget and Management, we have Stacy Massey, Senior Financial Manager, Jessica Martin, Financial Manager, and Eileen Kunkler, Financial Program Manager. And from the Ohio School Safety Center, we have Emily Taroque, Executive Director. So at this time, I'm going to pass it off to Jeff, and we will go ahead and get started.
Great, thanks, Jen, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Again, my name is Jeff Westhoven, and I'll be the first of your presenters today. To start, we know this is a busy time for you, as everyone has already either started school or getting ready to start. Lots of energy and excitement. So if a wayward student wanders into your office looking for a classroom, you need to step away. No worries. You can rejoin us later. As Jen said, this is being recorded and the slides will be available on our website after the session today. We wanted to talk about the background of the program, and we will make references to the 2021 program and the 2022 program. We'll tell you what that means. We wanted to share with you what is eligible to be purchased with these grant funds, how to claim your funds, and we will actually do a walkthrough screen by screen of the application process. Since these are federal funds, there are federal funding requirements which will be covered, and then we will handle questions at the end. In the previous program, we were able to award 95 grants, but we had over 1,300 complete applications. So supply and demand says that there's obviously a greater need for more school safety measures. Those 95 are being reimbursed and processed now, but that brings us to the budget bill, which allowed $100 million in funding to be awarded through what was called the ARPA School Security Program. And that's the next slide, Jen. That was in our budget bill, and that is in federal funds, different than the state funds previously. That allows us to make grants up to $100,000 per school and larger eligibility this time, so it's public school districts and chartered non-public schools. Part of the language that created that program allows us to consider applications from the previous grant program, which brings us to the program we're going to talk about today. It did state in the budget bill that the schools that were not eligible were those 95 that received money previously from the 2021 program, and any schools that had construction completed through an OFCC program within the previous 5 years. Okay. Next slide. I'm going to ask Emily Taroque from the Ohio School Safety Center to talk about the statewide goal for the program, particularly the tie-in to TAS. So Emily?
Thanks, Jeff. One of the main things that the governor asked us to do with this particular grant initiative was really to help schools have a baseline level of safety and security. So we do a lot of other things related to school safety, but The physical security measures is one of those areas that, you know, a lot of schools have requested information for us on. So we actually looked at the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools. They offer one of the most comprehensive guides available on best practices specifically for securing school facilities. This guide has been vetted extensively by experts across different education, public safety, and industry sectors. Their guidelines actually identify and classify best practices for securing K-12 facilities, really in response to urgent needs for information identified by the education community. So they really look to effectively raise the baseline of security in schools and provide different tiers of layers of security. So not just, you know, of the first initial layer, but if that layer fails, there's another layer that backs it up. And they kind of phrase that in terms of tiers. So what we decided for this grant when the governor said he wanted all schools to have a baseline level of safety and security is that we were going to use tier 1 of these past guidelines. You can actually go to the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools website and download a free copy of their safety and security guidelines for K-12 schools to really look at all of the tier 1 items that you could potentially get to begin with. We were able to update the 2022 authorized equipment list, or the AEL, that you all are familiar with, that you used last year, to actually align with those past tier 1 guidelines. So while you may have applied for some different upgrades last year from the previous AEL, this year, in order to accept your funds on the 2021 version of the grant, you will actually have to agree to purchase something off of the tier 1 list. And now that may sound a little daunting because you're not sure if the items you had before are on there, but I will tell you that a lot of the items that schools requested, things like security cameras, your public address systems, your lighting for your parking lots, really those basic things that, you know, maybe just be outdated at this point or need, you know, just some upgrades and some fresh ideas for them. A lot of those are actually on the tier 1 list. So we made sure before we decided to go this direction that a lot of those were on the tier 1 list for you to be able to select from. But as you do your grant agreements, you will be saying that you agree to purchase off of that tier 1 AEL list, which will be available for you. So all of the purchases from 2022 as well for the new grant cycle, the $100 million, both the, you know, the 53 that'll be coming in the 2022 grant, as well as those that were already awarded that we're talking to all of you today, those must be made from the 2022 AEL. And that will be further explained in a lot of the documentation that's on OFCC's website. And we're happy to answer any questions related to it. But a lot of those things you've already requested. Next slide, and I will actually turn it back over to Jeff Westoven.
All right, thanks, Emily. And so, you know, we talked about the $100 million, really 2 pools now. 47 million is the program we're talking about today, which are the applicants from the 2021 program. All of you would have received an email invitation or an announcement about this program. And so if you're one of those schools, you are here. Jen mentioned earlier that we will have a webinar coming up next week for new applicants. So that's the other $53 million. So that's how the program is divided into those 2 pools. Next slide. And on your previous application, so to refresh it, you would have requested up to $100,000 per school. You would have submitted a security and vulnerability assessment, and we use a lot of acronyms, of course. That is SVA. It would have been the 2021 version of it. You would have chosen from a priority list of items, the authorized equipment list. There was a longer list for that program. And then you would have written a description, a narrative that would have connected the vulnerabilities in your assessment to those items that you selected. And that's what your application would have entailed. Okay, next slide. And then as Emily mentioned, for this program, the eligible purchases, you're not required to basically implement your previously described project, but you are required to purchase from the 2022 list. You would receive $50,000 or your 2021 grant request amount, whichever is less. So if you requested $75,000, your maximum would be $50,000. If you requested $40,000, then your grant would be for $40,000. So any purchases using this funding we'll go through kind of the what, the when, and the how, right? So it would be for items on the 2022 list. That's the what. And if you made those purchases on or after January 1st, they were eligible, January 1st of this year. And they would need to be procured consistent with federal procurement guidelines, which we will discuss later in this webinar. So items that are on the 2022 list, made after January 1st, and then consistent with the federal procurement guidelines. Those are the things that are eligible for the funding you would receive. Okay, next slide. This is how to claim your funds. So this is the link that you would have received in our email. You would submit an award application through the Ohio Grants Partnership Portal. And for traditional K-12 school districts, it would be a single application for the entire district. For the community schools and ESCs that apply, they would apply directly on behalf of their own school. Part of that application process is to provide the data elements that we would need for federal reporting, and that includes a unique entity identifier, or UEI. If you previously had a DUNS number, then you probably do have a UEI. There's actually a lookup that you can find your number if you don't have it readily available. In that application process, you would review and attach a signed copy of the terms and conditions, and that includes, again, a commitment to purchase only those items that are on the new 2022 authorized equipment list. Next slide. Once we receive your application, we'll check it for completeness. We'll make sure the amounts are right. And then if approved, you'll get a notification that'll confirm your award amount. And then the Office of Budget Management will pay that amount to the applicant using the payment information that's on file with the state of Ohio through shared services. So that is how the approval of payment would work. And next, we are going to show you how to just walk through the application process, as we mentioned. So I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Martin from Office of Budget Management to walk you through. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Like you mentioned, I'm Jessica Martin. I'm on the Ohio Grants Partnership team within the Ohio Office of Budget Management. And Jen, you can go to the next slide. So we're just going to walk through the technical side of how to actually submit the application. As you can see here, this is our grants homepage. So the address is grants.ohio.gov. And there's lots of different helpful information about grants across the state and about best practices on this site. But today we're focusing on the actual applying for this opportunity. So you would then click on either funding opportunity at the top or from the little tile below in the grant resources. And then you can go to the next slide. Then you would click on the button that shows the active funding opportunities. You can go to the next slide. And so this is depending on, how many funding opportunities are active right now. There could be quite a long list on here. So you can use the different options at the top to actually filter for what you're looking for. So if you were to filter for education or public safety, that would be a good way to help find this funding opportunity quickly. And then you'll click on the 2021 Applicants Ohio K-12 School Safety Grant Program. So, like we were mentioning earlier, there's some 2022 opportunities that are currently active as well. So make sure you get to the 2021 application to actually apply for the one we're talking about today. And you can go to the next slide, Jen. So then it will take you to a page that shows you some background information about the grant program. Some very basic information, and it links to OFC's website as well. Next slide. And then it also shows you our contact information and the documents required at registration. So as you can see, the contact information on there is OBM's grants portal, grants email address, and then also OFCC's grants email address. So you can send questions to either of us. We're in constant communication, so we will help get your question answered. And for this opportunity for the 2021, there's only one document that is required to be attached, and it's the grant terms and conditions. So you'll want to make sure you download it, and you can, as we have highlighted, you can download it from the actual attachment section, and then you complete it before you actually go in to register. So you can go to the next slide, Jen. Yeah, so once you have downloaded that, you would click on the register button. Yeah, you can go ahead, just click on the button. And then you would start filling out the information about your organization. So the application does have to be completed within one sitting. So, if you need to go back and look at some of the information, we have a job aid that tells you all the information that you're required, or you can refer to this recording after the fact too. But we just want to give you a heads up, you have to complete it within one sitting. And Jeff already talked a little bit about the UEI process, but there is a link right there that shows you some more information about how to get a UEI. And I believe some of the documents that OFCC has put together as well tells you more information about the UEI process. You can go ahead to the next slide. So then you'll want to look up what your supplier information is. And so that's basically how the state, makes payments to your entity. And you can do that actually within the application. So you would click on lookup, and then you would either enter, part of your supplier ID if you already know it, or your supplier name. You can search that way. And just when you're looking through the different options, many districts may have similar names, or your district also could have multiple addresses that are associated with the supplier ID. So just when you're looking through them and selecting it, make sure you're looking to review the address that's actually the best associated address with where you would want to get the payment. Most payments will be done electronically, but there could be different banking information associated with different addresses. And we'll be, doing some verification reviews of that as well. Okay. So for this opportunity, there's only 4 questions, and they're pretty straightforward. So, the first one is, what is your district's IRN? The next one is, enter all the school IRNs that are a part of the application, enter the total requested amount for this district, and then just a confirmation question, have you signed and attached the terms and conditions? So the correct answer is yes, but on the next slide, we will see how to attach them. So this is why, as explaining earlier, it's good to just get that attachment beforehand, make sure it gets signed, either a written signature or an electronic signature, so that you can attach it during this process. If the file size is quite large, sometimes that happens when files are scanned, you can either compress it or just attach the signature page. And if you're running into any issues, please just email it to grants@obm.ohio.gov after you submitted your application, and include your district name and your IRN, and we can help attach that for you for this program. Then you'll want to list 2 contacts for the district or the school. And usually the grant contact is the person who is responsible for actually completing any reporting or getting certain emails and stuff. So that is typically the treasurer for the district. So eventually they would get a login to the portal to actually report on how they spent all the funding. So just make sure the person that's listed as the grant contact is the appropriate person to do the reporting and get that type of communication. Then finally, if you do not see the submit button at the bottom, if you see that form incomplete button, that means that something wasn't filled out or attached completely. So you can look back through, there's different required fields like we saw earlier that are in red with a little red asterisk. But then once everything has been completed, you'll see it change to submit, and you'll click on that button. And then usually it happens fairly quickly, but if you don't receive this type of email, this is an example from our testing environment, if you don't receive this type of confirmation email that the application was received within 24 hours, please email our grants inbox and we can try to make sure, and we'll just go in and see whether or not we received the application, just a confirmation if you don't get this type of email. We want to make sure we get all the applications we can. And now I will turn it over to Stacy Massey. She's she's the leader actually of our grants partnership team to talk about some of the federal funding requirements.
Thanks, Jessica. So we can go to the next slide. So my name is Stacy Massey. I'm the head of the Ohio Grants Partnership, and we're helping administer this funding on behalf of OFCC. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the basic funding information. We've gotten a lot of questions in the last couple of weeks about where this money came from, how do you record it, what USAS code to use. So I kind of would touch base on some of those items to kind of help with maybe some lingering questions you have. So the funding for this program is from the American Rescue Plan Act, and it is an allocation out of the state and local fiscal recovery funds from the US Treasury. It does have an assistance listing number, which is formerly CFDA. For some of us, it's been around a while, we could still call it CFDA. It's 21.027. And pretty much all of the uniform guidance requirements apply to this funding source, to include federal procurement. So let's go to the next slide. When you are booking this, just take care of this question right offhand. Your USAS code is going to be 599, so miscellaneous. I think that there's not a separate one set up for this, so just use your 599 fund for miscellaneous. And then you'll want to set up a special cost center to track this, because when you put this on your federal schedule, you're going to want to make sure that you've identified this as 21.027 funding from that assistance listing. So what federal rules apply? So I would highly recommend that you read through the terms and conditions that you have to sign and attach back to this application. That has a lot of pretty much every term and condition that is part of this. But I wanted to point out a couple of them to include federal procurement. Many of you already receive federal grants in other forms, so you're probably very familiar with the federal procurement requirements, but they are in 2 CFR 200.318 through 327. So everything that you would follow for your other federal grants that you receive from a federal procurement perspective continues with this funding. Also, you must have a unique entity identifier, which was formerly the DUNS number, and have it registered and active in the SAM.gov site. So if you haven't renewed, I will tell you that when the federal government transitioned over to UEI from DUNS, that the renewal process takes a bit longer than it did before. So I would highly recommend that if you are going to expire soon, that you go out and start your renewal process early, because there have been some issues with renewal that I've heard across the nation, just mainly because of that transition and the additional information that's needed at renewal as opposed to previously. So let's go to the next slide. So I just wanted to show, and this is a very good depiction of federal procurement done by the Office of Management and Budget from a guy named Gil Tran. Actually, he's retiring in December, but he is a wealth of information. But he put together this little bear claw that has all of the procurement requirements kind of in a nutshell in one image. I will say, since your award amounts are typically probably going to be putting you in the small purchases bucket, you're probably going to stay within the informal, which is the green. So anything 10,000 or below can be considered a micro purchase, and you do not need quotes for those. You should equitably distribute the funding. If you're going to keep repetitively going back to the same vendor, that's not an equitable distribution. But since you don't need quotes for anything that is that low dollar amount, they do ask that you equitably distribute that. You can get up to 50,000 on the micro purchase if you do a self-assessment. So if you have not done that already for your other federal grant programs, you can refer to uniform guidance. It gives you some ways that you can increase your micro purchase threshold. But then over 50 and up to 250, you get into the small purchases arena, where you must have an adequate number of quotes. The auditor states defined that as being at least 3. So I would highly recommend that you probably get 3 quotes if you're in that small purchase arena. Anything over gets into kind of sealed bids, competitive proposals, unless You're in the all the way over to the right side of the claw. There is unique public, unique or public emergency, or otherwise you can kind of get yourself into that bucket of sole source. I would definitely not recommend moving sole source right off the bat unless you have a very strong case for how you are procuring something that is unique, or doesn't have competition. So those are really some of the ways that you can get into the sole source bucket. Micro purchases, of course, are always, you can be sole source, but sole source, it really is requires strong justification from the federal government standpoint. So just because you want some proprietary type purchase, you need to make sure there is no other competitor in the environment. It's very hard to prove there is no competition or that something is unique. But refer to the uniform guidance. This claw kind of gives you all of the sections and various areas. So let's go to the next slide. If you're looking for more information, particularly on procurement, you can always visit our website at grants.ohio.gov, and this is the same site you'll go to click the funding opportunities and apply for this program. But if you navigate to the Ohio Grants Partnership, and then we have an annual Ohio Grants Summit. And on the last Ohio Grants Summit, we did a procurement session talking about federal procurement requirements. So if you're interested in more details about federal procurement, or you want to brush up on that for the use of all federal funds, I highly recommend viewing the recording for that session. But you can also sign up for our Ohio Connects newsletter. Once you go to the website, it should prompt you. And that will give you a lot of information on the upcoming webinars we may have around grants, talk about our next Ohio Grants Summit, and then also give you notifications about the newsletter gives you notifications about new funding opportunities to include schools. So we, whenever there's anything out there, we put those in our newsletter. So we think that that is it for my session. So I'm going to turn this back over to Jeff.
Thanks, Stacy. And I'm just going to point to some additional resources that are available to folks before we get into questions. So this is our OFCC website. You can see the link at the bottom. Actually, now it'll have two sections, one for the 2021 program, which we're talking about today, and another tab for the 2022. We can go on to the next slide. And you'll see on here, the red arrow one is the list of who's eligible. We mentioned before the Ohio Grants Partnership portal. And then in the resources, program guidelines, the authorizing legislation, the actual authorized equipment list to choose from. Jessica had mentioned there is a application job aid, which is kind of the walkthrough of what you saw on this webinar. And then we also have some frequently asked questions, some of which we've received already, which are convenient, and they're also in the resources. And I think we are on to questions. Okay.
All right, so I will go ahead and start reading through some of these questions. If we don't get to all of them, I do have everyone's contact information, and we'll reach out to you and make sure that we can get those questions answered, or we may put them on that FAQ list that Jeff had just mentioned is on our website. So I'm going to go ahead and start with some of the earliest ones that were asked. So one of the first ones we got was, we are a district that submitted a 2021 application and have been approved. However, the person who submitted the application and information is no longer with our district. Is there any way to get a copy of the application and other materials so that we can implement our improvements?
This is Jeff, so I can answer that. The OFCC application that they used is still active, so they can go back to the original login that they had, and that's still active to see their application. If they don't have the login credentials, we can send it to them. So if we just take a note of which district that is, we can send that to them.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, on to the next question. So when we're talking about schools in this presentation, does school mean individual building, or are we talking about a district?
Okay, so this is Jeff. So the $100,000 maximum applies per school, which would be per school IRN. as far as the application process, if it is a district, the district will be submitting the application on behalf of all the eligible schools within the district. I hope that answers the question.
All right, so on to the next one. So on 2021 applications, we gather quotes for the application. Are we locked into those quotes, or can you choose from different items if they are on the authorized equipment list?
I'll start with this one, and Stacy, you can jump in if you need to. Every purchase does have to be off the 2022 authorized equipment list. If there are quotes, we would recommend, again, the 3 quotes for any items that you purchase off that list. If there are items that are not on the list, then getting quotes for those doesn't help in this instance. I don't know if that was the question.
Hi, Jeff, this is Stacy. I think that I kind of understood the question to be if they applied for specific items, can they change to other items on the AEL that might not have been on their initial application to you guys in the 21 program?
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, so you can purchase anything off the 2022 AEL. If you recall, in the 2021 program, there would have been many more items to choose from. So a lot of those initial projects can't be completed because those items are no longer available. So really anything off the 2022 AEL can be purchased regardless whether that was part of your original 2020 application or not.
And then I'll add from a procurement perspective, if you had already had a few of these in flight, since the program does allow for that, then just make sure you followed federal procurement requirements. If you had something in flight, you're going to reimburse yourself for.
All right, thank you. So on to the next question. So schools who were notified that they were awarded funds from the 2021 program, can they also apply for the 2022 grant?
Great question. I figured we were going to get this one. Yes, the answer is yes. The $100,000 limit applies per school IRN. So if, for example, someone is receiving $50,000 from this 2021 program, then they're eligible for the remaining $50,000 in the 2022 program. So whatever the balance is, whatever they receive from the program we're talking about today, subtract that from 100,000, and that's what the eligible amount is for the 2022 program.
Perfect, thank you. And so on to the next question. Actually, the next question is about the same thing. So on to the following question. Are we looking at $50,000 per building or $50,000 total per district?
It is $50,000 per school building as that term's defined. So that's school IRN. We recognize some schools have multiple buildings, which could be like an athletic facility or an outbuilding. We're talking about really one school IRN.
All right, so next question is, if we have our equipment that we submitted previously, but would also like to request additional new equipment, which would bring the grand total to slightly over the 50K, but well under the 100K, should we submit the new equipment request for the new 2022 applicants grant opportunity?
Okay, so this program is limited to 50,000. And so if there's additional need, and it does fit within the 2022 AEL, we would encourage the school or the district to apply under the 2022 program.
All right, thank you. And I think we may have covered this, but just to make sure that we touch on it again, where can we find the terms and conditions to sign and upload? Like, where is that document located?
This is Jessica, and it would be within the attachment section on that funding opportunity page. So I think you got the direct link when you were emailed it. So there's an attachment section with like a job aid and a guidelines document, and then it actually has like the template for the grant terms and conditions. So you would save it, from there and then attach it once you're actually filling out the actual application.
Perfect. And so on to the next question is, what is the expected turnaround for these funds?
So this is Stacey. I can go through the process. So essentially, once you've completed the application, the Ohio Facilities Commission will review that. And once everything looks good to go, it gets sent over to the Ohio Grants Partnership to start the payment process. So that process generally takes about 15 days, 15 business days or so. But I do expect it could be sooner. So it's kind of like when you go to a restaurant and they give you a 20-minute wait and it's really 10. So we really hope that it's sooner than the 15 days, but we have a accounts payable processing center that also processes payments for a lot of other things. So a little bit of that's out of our hands, but it only takes us a few days administratively to get that out the door. Once you get an email, your application has been approved, you'll be notified, and then that 15 days will start. So you should receive a notification after your application has been approved and starts the payment process. Is there anything, Jessica, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just say too, it's once we see a complete application, both OFCC does the first round of processing and then we do the payment part of it. So, make sure that you've filled out all the questions fully, you've signed and attached the terms and conditions, you've entered a UEI, so and then you've associated your supplier ID, and doing all of those things fully will make it faster to be able to process them.
All right, thank you very much. So the next question is about a specific school, but about 20% of awards were used to purchase barriers for the entrances of school building, which was directly addressed as a need from the school building need assessments. However, barriers are not included on the authorized equipment list. Does this mean that they are not a Tier 1 expense and cannot be purchased, or those funds cannot be repurposed for these items?
Well, I'll generalize kind of the question. If there was something that was requested in the 2021 application and it's equipment that does not appear on the 2022 list, then it can't be purchased under 2022, but the funds can be repurposed for other things that are on the 2022 list. And I'm not sure, Emily, you may know more about which items are on there if barricades are on there, but other things are on there.
I would have to double check on the barricades if you want to send an email to the OFCC grants email to try to get that specific item addressed. But usually the items on the authorized equipment list will have a description immediately after them. If they're not on that list, then they would not be deemed as eligible for this time.
All right, the next question is, can Catholic schools apply for this grant?
For the 2021, that was originally open to just the public schools. For the 2022, yes, all charter non-public schools are eligible. So 2022, yes, 2021 now.
All right, so let me pull up the next few questions. We have quite a few of them, so I'll try to move quickly. Are purchase levels per building, or do we consider the entire district?
Could you repeat that?
Yeah, of course. Are the purchase levels per building, or do we consider the entire district?
I'm assuming that means for procurement purposes. And I can answer it in that approach. The procurement's based on the total of what you're procuring. So if you decide to, as a district, purchase maybe you need to buy the same piece of equipment for a couple schools that are eligible, and it totals over 250,000, then you do get into that higher threshold of procurement. But If you're just buying pieces and parts or one item at a time and it's not over that, then you're most likely staying under the 250, and that especially due to the size of these awards. And you just can get the formal or the informal with the quotes. So it's really dependent on what you go out to procure and what the dollar amount is in total.
All right, so the next question is, does the authorized equipment list have multiple vendors for specific items, for example, cameras?
So the authorized equipment list is vendor agnostic. It does not have vendors at all, but it has categories of equipment.
All right. So on to the next question. Do schools have to use the same vendors that they received quotes for during the initial application?
They do not. And we recognize that maybe they would have gotten quotes up to a year ago, perhaps now maybe those quotes aren't valid anymore. So yeah, it is okay to seek new vendors as long as, again, they follow the federal procurement guidelines.
All right, so someone had a clarifying question. Does a school need to get quotes for equipment they want to purchase if the amount is $100,000 or less? They were just saying the explanation was not clear.
If the amount is under, and it all depends on your procurement policies and the thresholds you have set. So if your procurement policy recognizes the federal threshold for small acquisition threshold of 250,000, so if it's $100,000 that they're going out for, it's under 250, so you can get 3 quotes for that.
All right, the next question, if a district is awarded money for several schools, is the money awarded per school required to be spent on that school alone, or can the awarded money total be used across different buildings?
The awards would be per school, the way the allocation is, and that becomes relevant, of course, because we have in the 2022 applications, we would need to know how much of the $100,000 maximum is still left for that school. So we would want to apply it, at least the dollars want to apply it to the schools in the same amount, even if the equipment is different per school, it would be the same amount per school.
All right, the next question is also about the procurement requirements. Are the federal procurement requirements per district or per building?
So it's per procurement. So it's basically how much, if you're going out you're going to buy so many widgets and the total price of those widgets gets you over one of those thresholds, maybe the micro purchase. So it's going to cost you over $10,000 to buy those widgets, then that procurement gets you into getting 3 quotes. Let's say it's over 10,000, it gets you into getting 3 quotes. If that procurement gets you over 250,000, then it gets you into more of a competitive bid situation. So it's really off of procurement as a district. If you buy them all separately by school, as long as it doesn't get viewed as a split procurement, but if you bought them all at separate times and was under the thresholds, then you're fine. But I'm assuming that your procurement function probably is at the district level, and you probably buy for the schools and maybe combine some of those in your one-time procurement. So at that point, you just have to look at what your total procurement is. I hope that that's kind of answering that question.
We also had a couple of questions of people, they just wanted to know, what is the deadline to submit the 2021 application?
The deadline is October 3rd of 2022, and it's concurrent with the deadline of the 2022 program as well. They both have the same October 3rd deadline.
It seems we have a couple of clarifying questions. People want to just double check and make sure this is a reimbursable grant. correct?
This is Stacy. This is not a reimbursable grant. You'll be provided the funding as soon as the application is processed in full. Well, that's different than most traditional grants. Does anybody else want to add anything to that?
Yeah, this is Jessica. I just wanted to add too, there will be reporting requirements on how you use that funding in the grants portal. And that will be on a quarterly basis. And we will have we'll definitely have like a job aid for how to do that and the timing and everything for when that will be due. And perhaps even a webinar on how to do that reporting when the time comes. So we don't have the due dates for that yet, just because we're waiting to see, when all the payments go out.
And this is Emily from the School Safety Center. Jeff, you may want to touch on this, but one of the other questions we get when schools think of reimbursable versus like an advance payment is more so about, if they've already purchased something and would like to use this grant as a way to reimburse themselves as opposed to the way that they get the funding. Can you touch on that and how far back they would be able to have those purchases if they were to do it that way?
Yeah, and maybe that's kind of what they were, the nature of the question was too. If someone made a purchase after January 1st of 2022, and they used the federal procurement guidelines and it was on the 2022 list, then that can be essentially paid for out of the grant, but we would not be requesting evidence of payment in order to receive the grant. And maybe so that's the distinction. When you fill out your application, you won't have to submit evidence that you've paid for the things that we are going to be eventually paying for out of the advance payment. So it can be used for things that have already been purchased, but we don't require evidence of those purchases first before the advance payment.
All right, so the next question, did anyone else have anything else to add before I move on to the next one? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. So someone had a question that would they have been notified previously if there were any issues with the grant application they had submitted? They stated that they never heard anything back regarding the application, if it was complete or if it had any issues.
So on the previous program, if an application was incomplete, basically the notices went out to the awarded 95, and notices didn't go out to the rest of those. So if anyone has a question about, was my application, or maybe if there was an issue with the application, again, they can go back into the OFCC grant portal and pull up their application, see if there was any issues with it. But every complete application that was able to be evaluated is in the group that was sent an invitation to this call.
All right, the next question is, so if you are a school that was awarded a grant, those funds must now be used in accordance with the 2022 authorized equipment list, correct?
Yes.
And I apologize for the delay. Some of these are a bit longer and maybe more better suited for individual questions. So one of these is, just for clarity, if a school was awarded for, or if a district was awarded for multiple schools, do they need to submit an application for each of those 3 schools, or is it one application per district?
It would be a single application on behalf of the district.
All right, so going through some of the more recent ones, someone was asking if you could clarify the deadlines for purchasing items for the grants, and are there any considerations for products that may be delayed due to supply chain issues?
since these are advance payment grants, then the supply chain issue would not be as much of an issue. I'm trying to think, and Stacy, you may know this, was it the end of December 2023, I believe, when funding had to be expended? And I can check on that.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yes,
And
that's correct.
And I do want to add, Jeff, that although these are advanced funds, like Jessica had indicated, like we will be responsible for, as the state, monitoring your use of funds. So as a school district, you should make sure you're utilizing that cost center and keeping track of all activities. So if you are reimbursing yourself for things that you might have purchased back from after January, then you're going to want to make sure you've moved the expense or somehow have isolated that expense so that when we do ask for reporting on your use of the money, since it was advanced, we're going to want to know after the fact how you're using it and throughout the entire period. And then we're going to want to come and monitor maybe a few use of funds that you might have reported to us. So you're going to want to be able to provide us a ledger and accounting of that. So you're going to want to keep track of everything separately. So I know that it can go back to January, and that was a previous fiscal year. You're going to have to find a way to track that against the program, if that makes sense.
Someone had a question of, on the grant application, it asks for congressional district. Is that federal or state congressional district?
That's federal. And you can go out to, I believe USPS has a website where you can kind of plug in your zip +4 and it will come up with it for you.
So there was another question. So if a school has an OFCC project or finishing up one, they are not eligible. Is that correct? A school has one K-12 campus, but also has an athletic complex and board office, which hosts a preschool. Would the athletic complex or the board/preschool still be eligible, even though they had an OFCC project in the K-12 building?
Okay, so let me address the second one first. So it has to be a classroom facility as the legislation defines it. So the athletic facilities and the board offices would not be classroom facilities that would be eligible. And the first part was, I believe, the timing of construction. So if a school has been built within the last 5 years through an OFCC program, it would not be eligible for this 2021 grant. If it's going to be demolished in, let's say, 2 years, it is eligible. And one of the things that we would want to see is a useful life of at least 5 years on the equipment. So if it's something that's, let's say cameras that could be movable, something that isn't necessarily a fixture to the building, if they could move it to the other building, extend the useful life, that would be the desired way to do it.
All right, so a question about procurement. If a quote that was received was under a purchasing system like Ohio Buys, DAS contract, etc., does that meet the federal guidelines?
This is Stacy. So I'm assuming that that question is coming from a school district. If you are a school district and you are using the state term schedule pricing, which may be allowed in your policies and procedures, and definitely for a lot of local governments allowed for in the Ohio Revised Code, you still are not following federal requirements if you are in the area of the little procurement clause I showed where you have to get 3 quotes. So you can use that as one of your 3 quotes, but you cannot use that exclusively, mainly because the federal government's put in the uniform guidance that the procurement that a state follows can be a state's process, but then any other non-federal entity receiving the funding must follow their own procedures. And by using the state term schedule, that was typically not competitively bid out. So the way that has been viewed by the federal government, and the state has gotten some audit findings in the past on grants, that is not a competitive process. And so subrecipients cannot use that pricing. So if you can get confirmation that Ohio Buys or the state term schedule that you're using was competitively procured, I would keep support of that. If you don't have that, then you can use as one of your prices. And the same thing follows suit for like GSA and other vehicles where people kind of do joint contracting. You'll need to make sure that it was a competitive process if you are going to use that, or you use it as one of your quotes. But that is a great question, because that is a common misconception by many local governments.
So we're getting very close to the end of our allotted time. I'm trying to pick some of the more general questions. If you have a more specific question that we haven't answered directly, my email address is going to be listed, and we'll also send a follow-up email in the days after this webinar. So please feel free to reach out if there's something that that we haven't addressed more specifically. One of the questions that we've received is, if we received an email confirming registering for the grant and that it will be reviewed shortly, how soon would we expect a notice confirming receipt of the grant funds?
So Jeff, you want to take that about the timeline of the review process of the applications until they get to us and start payment?
Yeah, I think the very first ones are over now to shared services, I believe. I think we have like 119 that have been submitted already. So thanks for everybody that's already done that. It should not take very long. I know it's hard to say in terms of days, but it should be, I would imagine, 5 days or less, as long as we have a complete application. The things that we have found that are common to some of the applications, in some cases the UEI was not provided, and so those go into a hold status until we get the UEI, or if the supplier ID information is not in there, that would slow down. But I think as Jessica showed, there's really only 5 questions to it, and so if you do all those, sign the terms and conditions, the ones that are complete, I would expect within 5 days on the administrative side, plus the payment.
So it looks like we are at time. I do have one last question that I'd like to ask the panelists, because I'm getting it a lot right now. People want to just verify. So if schools choose not to accept the 2021 grant funds, do they keep priority for the 2022 grant?
So I think that the governor mentioned this in the summit remarks at the School Safety Summit. So those that have 2021 applicants, this group, has priority for those grants that are being offered now. For the 2022, everybody has the same. If someone has received funding from 2021, then they have lower priority. Okay, so if you've received money from this distribution, then you have lower priority than if you have not received any at all. I don't know if that answers the question.
I would say received and accepted the money is probably a good way to phrase it. So if you decided to decline the 2021 funds, then you would have the same priority as everybody else in the pot for the 2022, the some 3,000 schools that are eligible for those funds.
Right. Right. The 2021 is not competitive per se. I mean, you can claim your funds now. The 2022 is competitive. That helps.
All right, well, there is a number of questions that we still haven't gotten to. Hopefully we've touched on some of them or answered them indirectly by answering other questions. But if there's something more specific, as I mentioned, there's a number of ways that you can contact us. You should have my email address as the organizer of this meeting. And then also there's information on how to contact us on OFCC's website. But we do want to say thank you for attending. We look forward to receiving your application. Just as a reminder, we can provide the PowerPoint for this, and also the recording is going to be available on our website. So thank you again. We hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. And again, we look forward to receiving your application.